get started, and everybody else will just join. I'm just going to do the quick recap anyway for the first few minutes. So we're starting in the section that they call Kriyat Shema and the Brachot, the reading of the Shema with its blessings. As I mentioned, we'll discuss the two blessings that come before the Shema and the one after for Shacharit, and there's two after for Ma'ariv. We'll discuss them when we finished discussing the Shema. Just a note of correction that I got when I told you that we say Baruch Shem Kavodo out loud and at the end of on Yom Kippur for Ne'ilah. We actually say it not only for Ne'ilah, we say it at all three places that we say the Shema during Yom Kippur. So we actually say it in Ma'ariv when we are saying the Shema. We say it in Shacharit when we say the Shema, and in Ne'ilah. All of those days, because we've reached our spiritual zenith, and basically we are exalted level like angels, we're allowed to proclaim this and acknowledge this complete sovereignty of Hashem, just as angels do around the Kisei Hashem. So actually, I went, thanks to being told by Yoni Stan and her husband, the fact that if you, we actually say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchut Olam Va'etz on Yom Kippur, all three times we actually say it aloud. So that's actually once a year, and not just as I said, at Ne'ilah. Okay, the other thing we spoke about is the importance of adding the Kel Melech Ne'eman before on page, in the art scroll, remember it's page 90, and in the Koran on page 99, those three words that mean Amen, abbreviate to Amen. We say those if we're not davening in the congregation, and we say if we are davening with the congregation, we don't say that because the Chazan will add the three words Hashem Elokeichem Emet, and remember the point of that is to get the total words of the Shema to represent the 248 parts of our body. And remember, we say that when we say the Shema and we mention those 248 words, what we're saying is that the Shema is helping us to actually heal all these different parts of our body. Also, remember we say that in the Torah, the enlarged ayin and the dalet, the Shema, at the end of Shema, the ayin, and at the beginning of and at the end of Echad, the dalet, are actually written in big uppercase, big letters, much bigger than the rest of the size of the Torah. And the reason, again, we said is because those two words combined, the two letters combined, the ayin and the dalet, make the word witness. And we are, when we say the Shema, we're a witness to accepting the yoke of the sovereignty of Hashem, the All Malchut Shamayim. The second thing we mentioned is about saying the dalet very clearly, so as to emphasize the fact that we're saying echad. We say echad, actually not so much, but echad. And the reason is because echad means one. Again, remember the dalet looks very closely like I showed you. It looks like a reish. Again, if you look at the second word of the Shema Yisrael, you'll see what the reish looks like. So Yisrael, the reish is the third letter of Yisrael, and it looks very similar to a dalet. So just not to be confused, we make sure we say that clearly. And the reason is because if we did say acher, which is the ray with the reish, instead of saying echad, we said acher. Acher would mean alien or different, and we don't want to do that. The other thing, as I said, and I'll probably come up again later, is not to skip over the cha of the chet in echad. Make sure you say that and not ech, as you're trying to say the dalet, because if you say echt, it's also a meaningless word. It doesn't mean anything, and you're not saying what the most important thing is of saying Hashem is one and He's omnipotent. Remember, again, the 3 paragraphs that we'll read as we go through the rest of the Shema. The first paragraph, the Shema, which is Va'ahavta, comes from Devarim in Parashat Ve'etchanan. And it talks about the acknowledging the unity of Hashem and loving Hashem. The second parasha, the second section, which is Vahaya Im Shamoah, which comes from Akev, which will be the parasha we're going to read this week. It talks about the Kabbalah of mitzvot, of all Malchut mitzvot, and also the consequences of sin. And the last paragraph, Vayomer Hashem, again, besides talking about the mitzvot, it also reminds us about Zechirat Yetziat Mitzrayim, remembering of the Exodus. And therefore, of course, the promise of redemption, which again we'll see is exactly what the Shema is always focusing on, the idea of when redemption comes, how Hashem will be one. And again, as I mentioned, women are not completely obligated to say the whole of the Kriyat Shema. By that I mean the 2 verses we've been discussing, plus the 3 paragraphs. But if they do, it is a special mitzvah, and especially if they can do it at the correct time. However, both women and men are always required to say the first 2 lines of accepting the Ol Malchut Shamayim twice a day. And it doesn't matter what time of the day, as long as it's, as I said earlier, sometime when you've arisen and sometimes when you go to bed. When you go to sleep. So any of the day or night is acceptable. All right, so let's look at the verse from Devarim 6.6. Okay, so if you actually look in the Chumash, I'm going to read you the Hebrew and the English, and it says Shema Yisrael, and now we say Adonai, and then we say Elokeinu or Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. So we don't actually say the proper name of Hashem, which we'll discuss in a minute, but that's what we say. And it means, Hear, O Israel, Hashem is our God, and Hashem is the one and only. So that's the first verse out of chapter 6 that we say. Rabbi Barclay and Yeager, in their book on guidelines to tefillah, say that this line actually holds endless layers of meanings, and it's a declaration of many fundamental principles of the Jewish faith. In fact, they list 7 different things that you should consider when you're actually saying the Shema. So the first one is that it's a belief that Hashem exists. That's number 1. The second thing is that there is no other God. The next thing is that Hashem is eternal and is for eternity. The fourth thing is Hashem is all-powerful. The fifth thing is that Hashem is the creator and the master of everything that exists. And the sixth is that Hashem watches over his people with a divine providence. So he basically cares about his people, and he watches over them. And finally, the seventh thing that we believe when we actually say the Shema is that Hashem will always ultimately, when the redemption comes, be acknowledged by all mankind. So those are 7 things that we actually are saying, just saying that one sentence of Shema Yisrael. Let's look at a little bit and concentrate on the individual words, one at a time. So if you take the actual word Shema, so Shema can be interpreted as meaning many things. It could be simply translated to be hear, like if you can, it comes from the word that you hear. You Shema, you hear something. Like you say to someone in Hebrew, Shema oti, did you hear me? So that's the one way. Another way, it could be listen to me. You can actually say to someone, listen to what I'm saying, actually. So it's a little different than Shema, did you hear me? But it's like, please listen to me. And third of all, the next thing that it could actually mean as well is to know something. Shema means actually more than just hearing it, but actually acknowledge it and having knowledge of it. So therefore, when you actually listen and hear, there's actually what you're doing is you actually hear, you understand it, you testify to it, and you actually believe in it. So Rav Kleiman says in his book on prayer and joy, he says that when we access our faith in Hashem through a sensory perception, so in other words, through our ears or through our mouth by saying something, it's so, for example, in this case, like hearing, then we don't really forget it.
It's right here.
And it's because it becomes part of our senses rather than part of just our memory, our brain. So it's actually a very interesting thing, because when I was having trouble hearing well, I went for 2 opinions on getting hearing aids. And I spoke to 2 different audiologists, and both of them actually said to me, you should get the hearing aids now, even if you're young. Don't be like a lot of people who wait until they're older when it's much worse or whatever, because they said, if your hearing stops, that sensory perception, it actually starts to affect your memory. So that's actually a very interesting concept if you think about it in terms of the Shema. If you actually, your Shema, your senses are the things that actually keep your memory going. And so once your hearing actually is not good, then you don't hear things and you don't see things and you're not aware of things. And as a result, your memory doesn't retain this information. So Rav Kleiman also continues, since we also believe that all Jewish souls were present at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai, when we received the 10 Commandments and the Torah, we already know that we already obtained a sensory input from that experience of the Torah. Okay, so if you carry on with this theme, Rav Schwab says that if you listen in Devarim, where they repeat the story about what happened at Har Sinai, also this was also in last week's parasha, Parashat Ve'et Hanan, it says, Ata hareitza ladat ki Hashem hu Elohim, ein od milvado, which says basically, Ata hareitza. So again, hareitza is you saw it. Okay, because it comes from ra'eh, which is your sight, your sense of your eyes. You saw it to know that Hashem is your God and there is no one like him. So not only are we hearing it with our ears, we're seeing it also with our eyes. So we've had both sensory experiences that have actually been part of our experience of accepting the Torah and seeing Hashem's power and his oneness. So he actually allowed us to actually see it by sight and by also to hear the sound of his voice from the heavens when we were at Har Sinai. The actual, another way of thinking of the ayin and the dalet is not only to remind us that we're a witness of God's oneness, but also to remember that we were witnesses at Har Sinai when Hashem gave the commandments and the Torah. We heard him and we saw him, and we were able to be connected in a sensory way that has stayed with us for all our lives and all our generations. And even those of us that were born so many thousands of years later, we still have this exposure. This is also further supported in the verse in Shmot in Exodus, which comes actually in Parashat Yitro, which you may know. Ve'et Hanan last week, I don't know if any of you realize, if you did read the parasha, is one of the times when they actually read the 10 Commandments. It's actually a repetition of the original time the 10 Commandments were given. The original 10 Commandments were given actually in Parashat Yitro, which is in Exodus, in Shmot, in chapter 20, verse 15. And just after the 10 Commandments were given in the parasha, again, there's a saying that says, the entire people saw the thunder and the flames, and the sound of the shofar and the smoking mountain. And the people saw and trembled and stood from afar. And they said to Moses, "You can speak to us now, and we shall hear. Let God not speak to us, lest we die." So basically, again, there was another sensory experience after those 10 commandments were announced, that the Klal Yisrael that were listening, and of course, but indirectly that means us, again had those two sensory experiences of seeing the flames and hearing the thunder and hearing the voice of Hashem say the Ten Commandments. Rashi comments that if you listen to that verse, it's actually saying that they saw the thunder. Now, we all know that actually it's not really possible to see thunder. What we do see is the lightning, right? And then we hear the thunder. So he said that the reason was that at this time when the 10 Commandments were given the first time, that actually they were given with a heightened help from Hashem. So the Jewish people actually really believed that the Matan Torah was actually being given because they actually saw it and they heard it, and therefore it's been ingrained in their senses, and therefore, as I said, in our senses for all the years to come. Rabbi Twersky also says we should compare the verse that I just read you earlier from the Parashat Ve'etchanan, where it actually says the words of the Shema that we say, to a different verse, also in the Parashat Ve'etchanan, which is a little earlier. It's not, remember, we were reading chapter 6, verse 6. Now we're going to chapter, let me get there. Chapter 4, verse 1. So chapter verse 1 also uses the word, let me read it to you. Oh, so I get cut off there. Someone called me. Okay, so it also says, V'ta Yisrael Shema, El HaChukim ve'el HaMishpatim asher Anochi melamed etchem. So if you translate that, it says again, also, now, O Israel, listen to the decrees and the ordinances that I teach you to perform. So again, we see that exactly the same word, the Shema word, again, of listening, is pointed out to the decrees, which in Hebrew, if you were listening, it's the word chukim, and ordinances, it's the word mishpatim. Now, again, chukim are laws, just like ordinances, and mishpatim are laws. But chukim are special laws because they're supposed to be laws that we don't 100% understand why we're doing them, or we can't find any sort of logical reason. Okay, like a lot of people obviously say keeping kosher, it's a healthier way to eat, and because whatever, I don't know, most of the blood's been taken out of the meat and salted. I know lots of people have justifications for things. It's not one of the things I personally do, but a lot of people, do justify what they've even proven. I once watched a video where they prove that the kosher animals are better than the non-kosher animals if they've got the cloven hoof and they chew the cud and stuff. There are lots of things that, as I said, that you can justify, but there's a lot of mitzvot that we do that we don't understand, but we still try to observe them and we don't question them. So it's very important that Ratursky says that these verses have in common the word Shema, which again, as I said, means hear, listen, and know. And know that when you're accepting the yoke of heaven by actually saying these words of the Shema, you actually are really going beyond just servitude of Hashem and just doing Hashem's ways and words like you do when you do mitzvot. Instead, you actually have a total and unquestioning submission to Hashem's power and his greatness and his control of everything. So as much as we know that we do have free will and things to do things, the Shema is a place where we really are handing over all control to Hashem and saying that Hashem is the all and omnipotent power. All right, if we carry on to the next word, so we've done Shema and Shema Yisrael. The next words are Hashem Elokeinu. Okay, so if you look at Hashem Elokeinu, Rav Kleinman again says that through these words, we are accepting Hashem's rulership, his kingship. Okay, he continues again that the two name, remember, we've spoken about this before, whenever we mention the two names of Hashem, we're talking about the merciful judge, Hashem, when we say his name with the double words, Hashem Elokeinu. And it also encourages us to believe that as a merciful and absolute ruler, that even though Hashem is in charge of everything and what he does, we believe that what he does is always for our good. Rav Schwab says, we do not say Hashem's name, which is the normal Shem, it's called the Shem Havaya. I'm going to say it as Yud K Vav K, but as we know, you can read it in the text. That's not the real name, because we never say the real name of Hashem. So it's called Shem Havaya, which stands for the name of existence. Okay, so in other words, and that's basically the way it's spelled. And when you are actually saying it, you should think of it, even though you're saying Adonai and not his real name, you should think of it that it means what it actually means. The existence is that Hashem, he was always here, he is always here, and he will always be here. And that's the true meaning of his name, that he makes all existence exist, and that he himself will exist forever. Furthermore, when we say the word Adonai instead of his real name, what we're saying is we're actually saying the Hebrew translation of Adonai means my Lord or my God. And that means we're accepting that Hashem is our personal God. So we're also in the stage accepting that Hashem is our God, and that he does care about us individually as well. Which brings us to that last two words of Hashem Echad, which is Hashem is one. Again, these are the real words that are affirming that there is no other power but Hashem. So Rav Schwab says that Chazal have discussed in the Talmud that there are important requirements of actually pronunciating the actual three letters of these words. Like, you've got to say them dwelling in appropriate places and for the appropriate amount of time when you say the word Echad. So let's look at the first letter, which is Aleph, and is one. It stands one. That one is supposed to be said very quickly, and we shouldn't dwell too long on the absolute unity of Hashem, because it's not really a concept we understand, and we don't want to be confused. We just want to make that statement that I said, that we believe that he is one and that his power is the sole power. The second letter, the Chet, is said with a slight lingering that expresses that we accept. Remember, we've spoken about this, the 7 layers between heaven and us and Hashem. So the 7 layers and us is 8, it's an 8, and Chet stands for 8. So they are basically, by saying the Chet, we are saying that we realize that it's taking 7 layers for our prayers to go to Hashem. And finally, we come to the Dalet, which is 4. And that has to be said, as I said earlier, with a lingering emphasis by holding one's tongue. So the way to do it is to sort of put your tongue by your teeth or your upper palate when you say the da, and to make us think we are surrounded on all sides by Hashem. That's what the Dalet stands for. It's 4 letters, and it makes us think of all sides that are Hashem. So that one we linger a little longer. So it's Echad. Okay, that's basically how we do it. Echad. Okay, and that's how it goes. In fact, if you look at what Reb Potash says, again, he summarizes it. He says that when you're saying Echad, you should consider each letter of the actual following input. So again, Aleph, as I mentioned, has gematria of 1 because it's the first letter of the alphabet. And Hashem is 1. And that's what we're focusing on over the entire universe. And that's all we're focusing on. Remember, I said not much concentration, just to know that Hashem is 1 over the entire universe. The second letter, we say the chet, which we have to remember to say cha, okay, cha, is the 8th letter of the alphabet. So gematria-wise, that means the number 8 stands for. So again, it's Hashem is 1 over the 7 heavens and the earth we live in, which makes 7 plus 1, so that's 8. And finally, number 4, the Dalet, which is the 4th letter of the alphabet. Hashem is 1 over the 4 directions and of the 4 directions of north, south, east, west, all over the world, or up, down, left, right, if you want to think of the directions like that. And we all know that famous song when that our children or grandchildren learn about Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere, and then it goes up, up, down, down, in, out, and all around. So that's the concept again when we're saying the Shema that we believe and we think of. Rashi's idea says that currently Hashem is our God and of the Jews, and we all believe in him, but the non-Jews don't actually necessarily believe in the oneness of God yet. But in the future, when the Geula comes and the redemption, then everyone will accept that there is only one Hashem, and all the nations will accept that. So when we're saying the Shema, we actually believe that there is Ein Od Melvado, that there's no one like Hashem. And we actually believe that because there's no one like Hashem, he will become universal to everybody. So you also have to focus that, yes, we as the Jewish people already accept that, but we know that there's no one like him and that eventually everybody will feel the same. And this is in the prophecy of Zechariah, who was one of our later prophets. And in verse 14, chapter 14, verse 9, he says, what did I say? Verse 9. Okay, and it says, V'haya Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz, bayom hahu yeh Hashem echad, u'shmo echad. Okay, so there you can see exactly again how we're mentioning that Hashem is 1 and his name is 1, comes from Zechariah. And it says there that, and then Hashem will be king over all the land, and on that day, Hashem will be 1, and his name will be 1. So we know that in that prophecy, everyone will see that the name of Hashem is 1. All right, let me see how we do. Okay, we've got time. So we're going to move now to, again, Baruch Shem Kavod, Malchuto Le'olam Va'et. Blessed is the name. So we're still, for those of you that are in the art scroll on page 90, it's the bottom line, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'et. And again, in the Koran on page 99. So basically this tefillah, this prayer, is basically saying that the glory of Hashem's sovereignty will be revealed to the entire world forever. So again, it's another reaffirmation of what the Shema is saying and what we were thinking in the Shema, but it's actually saying it in the words, if you translate it, blessed is the name of his glorious kingdom for all eternity. So that Hashem's kingdom and his holiness will be revealed forever. Rabbis Potesh and Yeager, again, in their guidelines on tefillah, they say that if we actually look at each separate words of individually, like if you look at the word Baruch or blessed in this context actually doesn't mean blessed. It means to increase, to make it more, okay, to increase it. Shame in this case, which translates in English to name, if you look at the English translation, really means the revelation. So if we're asking, or we're considering that Hashem increased the revelation, and again, kavod malchuto, again means the vision of his kingship, that everybody will see that Hashem is the king. And finally, Leolam Va'et, for all eternity, means that it actually will be at the end of the worlds when the Mashiach comes, and it'll last then forever, and everybody will continue with that awareness. So basically, Repotash summarizes it. He said that if you think of this line, it doesn't really, as it has been translated so many times, it really means, may the revelation of the glory of Hashem's kingdom be increased forever. So that's what we should consider when we're saying it. Okay, the idea is also further reinforced, as I told you last week, from Yaakov Avinu. If you remember the story, when Yaakov Avinu was about to be niftar, knew he was passing away, and knew Hashem had taken his ruach kodshecha, his spiritual power away, and he could hardly talk and anything. But he wanted to give his children hope that there would be a Mashiach and a redemption, and he wanted to try to explain to them what that meant. And remember, Hashem showed him that his children were saying the Shema. And when he heard that his children were saying the Shema, he realized that that was the road to redemption, that the acceptance of the meaning of the Shema. And he actually said, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'et. He actually said those words, and therefore was an indication to us that the Mashiach would come when we have this revelation and acceptance that Hashem will be the king forever. Chazal in Pesachim, page 56a, have an interesting parable that they basically describe that the Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto is actually considered like a spice for the Shema. So they talk a little bit there about how someone is eating food, and that the food itself is nourishing and giving them strength, and obviously, sustaining you, because if you eat food, even if it's tasteless, you're getting the energy from it. But basically, by adding spice, you get an extra dimension to the taste of your food and to the enjoyment of your food, really. So for us Jews, they say in this page of the Talmud, the Shema basically is like the nourishment that sustains us. But for us as human beings, the Shema is something that's really deep down hard to understand. It is hard to understand how Hashem has omnipotence, how we still have free will to do things. All these concepts of how Hashem can be here and he can be in Israel at the same time, or in South Africa or England. It's very hard concept to understand as a human being. So as a result, we follow with a sentence, Baruch Shem Kavod, because it adds flavor to our Shema. Just like a spice adds a certain flavor, this adds a flavor because it emphasizes Hashem's kingship. And understanding what kingship is helps us to understand and properly appreciate the actual verses of the Shema. And it's also, when we say something about kingship, it's more understandable to us what kingship means, and we can understand it in terms of one day when Mashiach comes, that everything will be revealed and it'll all be clear to us then. Okay, and also remember, I'm just going to give you a couple of reminders before I finish off today. The first thing is that the first verse, the verse of Baruch Shem Kavod, is said quietly. And there are three reasons I mentioned last week why we say it quietly. So the first reason we say it quietly is because obviously it's not part of the actual Shema that we read. If you would look in Va'et Chanan again as chapter 6, verses 4 to 9, which are the actual Shema and the Va'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, that is all written very clearly in the Torah. And remember, we discussed last week how the Shema specifically is a prayer where we are reading from the Torah. And it's not really a prayer of requests or a prayer of wishes or anything. We are specifically reading stuff from the Torah to fulfill the mitzvah of actually making sure we read some Torah at least twice a day. And second, so the first reason is because, remember, it's the praise of angels, and we don't want to equate ourselves to angels, except, of course, as I mentioned on Yom Kippur, when we do it, and we do say it loudly. The second reason is that Moses actually brought the words down from Har Sinai and taught them to us. And he was the one who, in the oral Torah, decided that we should actually add this after Ashma. But he didn't want the angels to be jealous that he had sort of stolen their words. So from that point of view, we do it quietly because we don't want the angels to overhear us. And lastly, as I said, again, we also, where was my third reason here? What did I say? It's not paid of the thing. Oh, sorry, it's not part of Devarim. The second thing, it's a praise of angels, and we don't want to equate ourselves. And the third one is we don't want the angels to envy us that we actually are able to say this to Hashem. So also, again, Rashi summarizes the theme of the two verses of the Shema, and he says that the verse requires the same. These verses both require the same concentration as the Shema, the Baruch Shem Kavod, and the Shema require the same concentration. And as I mentioned earlier, those are the two verses that every single person needs to say twice a day when in reference to what was being told in the Torah. It's the Shema and the Baruch Shem Kavod that actually need to be said to accept the yoke of heaven. Finally, this is an interesting custom that I found, and it comes and actually has come down and been brought as a halacha in the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch, remember, is the prepared table of laws and halachot of what we follow, of mitzvot that we need to do. And so this is a very interesting one, that if you're in shul and the congregation is saying the Shema, you actually should say these two lines with them, okay? Especially if you are really not doing much in shul. Like, let's say you came late to shul, but you've already davened at home. Like I know a lot of people will do a lot of davening at home because they know they're going to be late to shul. So they'll do davening at home and they'll come to shul just in time, say, to listen to the Torah or to be there for the Amida and the Kedusha, the Shmoneh Esrei and the Kedusha. So they come there and they just basically not really davening, they're just waiting for those communal parts of the service. So the Shema, and saying those first two lines of the Shema, is considered as a very important part of the communal part of the service. And so even if you've actually said them in your house already, or in another minyan already, and you just happen to come there and are waiting for a kiddush, or maybe if you're a man and you're waiting to do the laning, or if you're waiting to go and prepare the kiddush, or if you're waiting for another minyan, or you're waiting to listen to the rabbi's speech or a Dvar Torah that someone's giving, or even if you're giving the Dvar Torah or something like that, then it's really important that you say the Shema together again. And if you haven't said it yet, and even if you may be saying it later in another minyan, you still should say it, because of the fact that this tefillah is just like any other tefillah. The combination of saying it with the congregation and with the community is a very powerful recitation, and going up as a group to Hashem makes it really powerful. As I explained to you last week, Rav Schwab said that he's very upset because in some congregations it's actually become a tradition that they don't even say it out loud anymore as a community. And it's even said by many commentators that even women should be saying it out loud, because first of all, it's not a matter of sneer, because men are saying it out loud as well and should be, louder than us. And so you can say it out loud on the woman's side. And it's a recitation. And basically, to ignore it would be really what they say is a lack of derech eretz. So derech eretz, if you translate it, means like common courtesy. It would be an insult, really, to the people that are there that are busy saying the Shema if you didn't say it with them and join the communal goal of trying to get these words out and in front of Hashem. So basically, all opinions agree that the only time you wouldn't say them, and this is the only time you wouldn't say them, is if you were actually a little behind. Let's say you were in the shul and you'd been davening, but somehow you got behind, and you were still saying the pre-brachot to the Shema. Remember, that's what we're still going to discuss in the coming weeks. So if you're actually saying those pre-brachot to the Shema, then you should actually not say the words, but actually, funnily enough, you should pretend like you're saying the words by actually covering your eyes, concentrating on the idea, because anyway, the brachot before the Shema, as you'll see, or anyway, focusing on the idea of Hashem's oneness, but not mentioning the words, so that it looks to everybody that you're not, insulting them by not saying the words. But otherwise, and you should concentrate and cover your eyes. So therefore, basically, you should make sure that you're not disrespecting the congregation that you're sitting in, and not saying anything when everybody's saying the Shema. And as you'll see, there's very similar things said about saying the Kedusha, saying Aleinu, and even saying Ashrei when we discuss those prayers. So we will discuss also further this issue that I've just mentioned about saying the Shema together, because it's a very important issue when we discuss of when you come to shul late and how you catch up on the prayers and what prayers you say when you try to catch up. Because if you are trying to catch up, the goal is always to try to catch up, to be ready to say the Shema. That's like your first prayer that you really want to say together with the community. And so that's just again an interesting final addition. Next week again we'll start on the 3 paragraphs individually, discussing them, reading them, and understanding them individually. But I hope again that at least those 2 lines, which as I said are really the most important ones for us to say every day, twice a day, we've got a deeper understanding today. Okay, everyone?
Thank you.
Questions?
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Okay. You're welcome, you guys. And have a great week now that we missed the first hurricane. All right. Bye.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good to see you, Cherna.
Nice to see you, Judy, too.
How you doing?
Hello to Ari. We're doing, not doing much.